Good day, everyone. Today is June the 1st, 2021. Sitting up here just kind of chilling, thinking about some things, having a little sip and doing my little vape thing. So if you hear some strange noises, that's probably what it'll be. But I'm here to talk about a portion of Black history, a portion of Black history that was very tragic, and that is with the Tulsa Oklahoma incident, which was originally Greenwood uh, before it became Tulsa. Um, it's a sad part of history. And before we even get into this, one thing as a black person in this country and throughout the world, we must understand first off, before we go any farther, that no one is the greatest master of deleting, erasing, and rewriting history than the white man. He is the master of that. And I guess, as some people may know, if the Egyptians could tell the future, this is why they wrote things in stone. Stone was not the only means that the Egyptians had to document their history throughout the temples and the walls of the pyramids. They also writ on papyruses, which were paper. But in order for this history to survive, they written it in stone. They written it in stone and carved it in stone and told the stories on the walls. Those still can be destroyed, but not like paper. Hence, you get the term or the catchphrase, "Is it written in stone?" Because this white man will erase and delete your history in a heartbeat and then retell it to his liking. So, getting to the point, Tulsa. I knew a lot about Tulsa back in the 90s. I was out of high school then, a young man in my 20s. I did hear some stories and read up on some small articles about it, but never really dug into it like I could have back then. But now that I have internet so many years, later, the internet is so prevalent and everything is at your fingertips. That was then when I found out more. And that was after 2000, because I didn't get a computer until after 2000, my first computer. Even back then, the internet was very primitive, very slow. We had dial up. There was no such thing as high speed. If you wanted to download a 30-second clip, it would take 12 minutes for it to load. But now we have all this information lightning fast at our fingertips, and there's not nothing you really can't find out. Tulsa, Oklahoma, a massacre. And as I heard another YouTuber say, I guess by the name of Professor Black Truth, Tulsa is truly a metaphor for literally hundreds of other towns in which the same thing happened, but never was recorded. Story was never told. You may hear bits and pieces from some of your family members who were around when these tragic events took place throughout America. And you may even hear traces of it from your parents or grandparents if they're around still. And my whole idea of thinking is that 100 years after the massacre took place, I guess white America figured most of the people who were around at that time would be dead by now. But as far as I know, for the record, there is one surviving person that's still living today from that era. That was the actual time when that massacre took place. There's only one left. There's been plenty of documentaries and interviews about Tulsa, but even with those numbers of documentaries and interviews, it still was swept under the rug. And you have to just be like lucky as far as jumping on a needle in a haystack to find some of these interviews and be willing to sit down and look at them and listen to them. I guess to start off, there's one thing that pisses me off about this, and it's not the fact of the act of what happened in Tulsa happened. That's terrible. Of course, that's going to piss you off. The thing that pisses me off about this whole piece of history is that a majority of black people don't even know about it. And to me, it's sad and it pisses me off at the same time because we should want to know and have an uncontrolled and a desirable thirst for our own history. And we, as a whole, do not. I don't care how many black people went to college, got a degree, making six figures. I don't care about those numbers. When you look at us still today in 2021 as a whole, as one group, we still do not read as much as we should. And even if you're not an avid reader, with an invention like the internet with so much information on it, we should be able to utilize the information at our fingertips if you can't make it to libraries or certain things to actually get the books. And let's not confuse Google searches with research. It's two totally different ball games. What you find on Google is a precursor to you actually going to the library and getting books and finding records. Google is just a precursor to research. Another thing about incidents like Tulsa and so many others that took place in this country, massacres, they're all hidden, they're all covered up, and the only way you can find out about most of them, if you don't find it in the book, is by listening to the townspeople, the survivors, or the children or grandchildren of those that lived through the events. It's through them talking and through overhearing conversations. Greenwood or Tulsa, Oklahoma was not just that one city. Like I said before, there were so many others that went through the same thing, and the story was never told. And this is where I have to get on the older generation. I'm not letting them off the hook. Y'all know that these things happen and you don't talk about it and you don't pass it down so that the history can be taught, learned, and accepted by the younger black generations so that we can look at it and say, this is what we went through. This may make us a better people by knowing our past. And I kind of fault the old people for that in a way that I'm not really happy about at all, because I've always said that older people are a wealth or in a treasure trove of information and history. We need to sit down and listen to what they have to say. We can learn from what they say. But sometimes they keep things bottled up and they forget. Now, this is the side of the story about that I had to be forgiving on because, excuse me, even though they have all this information, you can get easily caught up in the everyday stresses of life of just making it from one day to the next. I get it. Getting caught up in the daily work and grind, uh, the things about, keeping your bills paid. Are you still going to have a roof over your head? And with that, when you focus on those type of things, you can easily forget to take the time out to pass down something as simple as history. I get it. I also get the fact, which I found out from my own mother on her deathbed, that sometimes the life that they lived was so painful that they don't want to talk about it. The life that they lived was so heart-wrenching and, they don't want to remember it. They feel like they don't want their kids and their siblings to know what kind of life they lived. And I'm not going to go too much into detail, but when I heard the story about how my mother lived and grew up in a Jim Crow South in Mississippi at 40 years old, it brought me to tears and literally to my knees to know that not just my mother, but any black human being had to endure with what they did growing up in the South in those times. Black women today, I say to you, I don't care how strong and independent you claim to be, y'all not even in the same book as some of these people, as such as our parents and grandparents. And I'm 51 years old. But when I listen to the life that my mother lived on a daily basis, that in itself was a fucking Holocaust. Which I'll go deeper into that word in a minute. But Tulsa was terrible. It was the first act in this country where bombs were dropped on people. And like I said, the thing that pisses me off is that we don't even know this as black people. And I'm like, it's strange to me because it's like some of the things that happened to our people in history, how in the hell did I know about some of this stuff before I came out of eighth fucking grade? And then you got people out here in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and I would say a good part of their 50s that don't even know this stuff. And I knew half of this stuff coming out of eighth grade about how they use children as gator bait. That seemed like it just became popular a few years ago. I've been knowing about this shit since before I came out of grade school. That's the type of person and character and personality that I have. I don't know what caused me or drew me to learn about things like that. And I'm still learning because learning is a process that never ends. Knowledge is infinite. Anybody that thinks they know or tell you they know everything, they full of shit. You can learn something after a long, healthy life and you laying on your deathbed. you still got room to learn. But I can't understand how I knew half of this stuff that people are just now talking about today. That just bewilders me. And there was a website that I found back in the early 2000s called Black Holocaust, and it talks about atrocities like this. There was one that took place in Chicago around in the same time frame. I believe that incident, there is some stories about it. The city of Chicago has talked about it. And I think that was an incident where a black man was, they had segregated beaches up here. A black man was swimming in the water and the current drifted him over onto the white side of the beach and they stoned the man to death. I don't know if this is the same incident, but it triggered off a bunch of race riots. I think this happened in 1919, which, if I'm not mistaken, that might have been the time when World War One was going on. But there was an incident that took place in Chicago. They have a name for it. I forgot. They call it the I don't know if they call it the Bloody Summer or something like that. There's a name they dubbed for it. But it took place at this in the same time era as the Tulsa incident. And I remember reading from the vlog on this website about it called blackholocaust.com. It was terrible because some of the places that they described and the addresses that they gave in the city where there were atrocities happening are places I drive through almost on a daily basis. And when I drive through these places, I can't help but to think about what was described when this race riot took place in Chicago. It was so bad. It was so bad that there were literally mostly black bodies just laying in the streets. And just like in Tulsa, they were picking them up, loading them up on wagons, and burying them in mass graves. This is in Chicago. Some of the areas and the addresses and the streets I drive through, and I'm like, this happened. There's the blood of my people on these streets because of racism in America. That website, I don't know if it still exists because it was years ago when I looked at that website, but it was called blackholocaust.com. And it had all these gruesome stories about racial incidents and massacres that took place in America that no school, no teacher is going to tell you about. And it's about my people. It's about my people. Like I said, well, I'm going to say it again. There is no master greater when it comes to deleting, erasing, and rewriting our history than the white man. And that's not just here in America, but we're talking about going all the way back to Egypt, ancient Kemet. This is what they do. They slaughter you barbarically. They brutally murder you and systematically put you in a position where you're 100 steps behind. And then they rewrite the history to show the world that a big lie, we wasn't that barbaric towards other people. it just kind of pisses me off that I'm hearing all this talk about Tulsa 100-year anniversary when more of us should have known about this before this point. The media should have covered it in more documentaries before this point. It's been 100 goddamn years. And now, when they think all the survivors and the descendants may be dead, now we want to talk about it. And that's total BS to me. It's total BS. Now we want to talk about it 100 years later. And like I said, the guys behind this is we hope that all the surviving people from that era are gone, are dead in the ground, so that they can't really tell the horrible truth. And like I said, you got one descendant that was not a descendant. He was an original person. He's still living. One left, just one. And they waiting on him to die. So that if they ever came to him and put cameras in his face, he wouldn't tell the true horrors about how these people are. Now, speaking on that, here's another similar incident that a lot of people don't know. I was helping my son some years ago do a report about Black History Month. And for some reason, on his own mind, he picked Ida B. Wells to write a story about. In Chicago, we have a street named Ida B. Wells that just happened a couple of years ago. We had a housing project, Ida B. Wells. Close to that project is the actual home that Ida B. Wells lived in on the south side of Chicago. And Ida B. Wells was like, I guess you could say she was like a journalist, or not like an editor, but a writer. And she covered the riots in St. Louis, which was another massacre that took place in the same time period. And those riots were brutal towards Black people. These riots, they caught women and cut their pregnant women's babies out of their stomach and stumped the fetuses into the concrete. They killed, they burned people alive, they lynched people. These riots took place in St. Louis around the same time frame in the early 1900s. Ida B. Wells went down there and covered the story and the aftermath of what happened in those riots, which for her in that time, that was a very brave thing to do. Her reports, now I'm finding this information out on the internet as I'm helping my son to write this report. And she wrote a report about her findings in the riots and the gruesome things that took place during the riots. The report was so gruesome. She submitted the report to Congress, and Congress agreed to seal this report keep it sealed up until the year 2000. I believe it was 2005. Somewhere in there, give or take. And I'm like, wow, that's like at the time I was doing helping my son do the report, I think it was that year. So the conditions that Congress laid forth was that It was to be unsealed, read before Congress, and released to the public. Oh well, y'all know how that shit turned out. Didn't hear a damn thing. I was looking forward to that. Obviously, there was no news coverage. There were no headlines. I just found this out on the internet as my son was doing a report about Ida B. Wells. Her findings were so gruesome and so traumatic that she documented and wrote down. They sealed that for almost 100 years. And it was supposed to be open in 2000 and something and read before Congress. And I believe that's, that type of tactic is the same thing they did with Tulsa. We figure there'll be no more survivors by now. Everyone will be dead. It will only be great-grandchildren and grandchildren that might be old enough to tell the story. And by the time they tell it, it'll be so so diluted. And anything that is too graphic, the media will delete it and edit it. But they waited all this time because they don't want anyone to tell how barbaric these savages were. And I'm not talking about the black people. Tulsa, as Professor Black Truth said, was a metaphor. There were many, many, many massacres that took place in this country that was swept under the rug, not even published, not printed, not put in the history books, to show how cunning and barbaric some of these people are. White people. But I'm also upset with black people because we should know our history. And a lot of us don't. And even though they're making it public now about Tulsa on mainstream media, which I think is a slap in the face to us as black folks, there's still a lot of us as black people who won't even tune into it, who still won't know in 2021 about what may have happened to some of their great-great-grandparents who were connected to that. We should always have a thirst for learning about our history as black people. And when it comes to our history is the world's history. So let's not get this shit twisted. History for black people didn't start with slavery in America. You want to go back to our history? You go back to biblical times when they talked about the pharaohs in Egypt, when they talked about the Hebrews in the land of Israel, when you talk about the ancient Mayans and Aztecs down in the central and southern parts of South America. Our history is all over the world. We are the indigenous people of the planet. We wasn't just in Africa. We were all over. And artifacts and archaeological finds and digs prove it all the time. All the time. White folks steady digging, steady looking, steady carbon dating, and every time they come up with some bones, as the late Paul Mooney said, oops, it's another nigga. Excuse my language, but it's the truth. White people are searching for a history they never had. But that's a whole nother subject. Tulsa, Oklahoma, excuse me, it should be more known, but as an individual, a black individual hearing this video, make it your point and make it your duty to pass down anything and everything you know to the younger generation. I once saw an old man that, I was driving for this bus service and picked up this old man in a wheelchair, and they had a family gathering, and he was talking about what it was like as a child and growing up. And matter of fact, he was from Oklahoma. And I was like, well, he talked to me as I was driving the bus more about the history of himself and his family, probably more than he did at the barbecue I picked him up from. And I told him, I said, you might not have much longer on this earth. God willing, if you're able to go to another outing like this on the 4th of July or whatever day it was, make people sit down and listen to your story, your family. Before everybody start fixing plates and cutting up ribs and links and macaroni and cheese and shit, sit down and make these young people listen to your story. You can't take for granted that people know. As a matter of fact, piggybacking on that, you can't take for granted what people know because you think they should or you think they may automatically know. Here's an incident I went through myself with my little god brother. Martin Luther King's holiday was coming up. And at that time, I think he was still in grade school. And I said, yeah, okay, Martin Luther King. All the hype was on TV, this, that, and the other. And I asked him, do you know who Martin Luther King was? And he said no. But in my mindset, I'm already, kind of like programmed to think that all black people know who this man is and what he stood for and what he was about. And when I asked my little god brother what he knew about Martin Luther King, he said he don't know. And I said, okay, I got to get on the ball. So I didn't wait no other few days or a week later or whatever. I sat him down right there on the spot. And I told him everything that I knew about Martin Luther King and who he was and what he stood for and what he tried to achieve for us as a people. And I hope that it stuck, but that was a shining example for me that you can't always assume that the younger generation knows. And with that being said, that could be the same case with our older generation who would think that we automatically know and we don't. This is why I fought some of the older generation, because y'all knew, y'all lived it, y'all was a part of the history that was written in the books. And y'all need to pass this down, and y'all don't. Y'all go to the grave with all this information. And our kids are out here, when it comes to our history, with just nothing but air in their head. Because we automatically assume and think they know. And then on top of that, you being the older person, you live through it and you don't even tell it. I heard my father say something one time, because this whole talk about indigenous peoples and us being Indians, it's not a black person alive of a certain age who didn't hear their parents or grandparents or great grandparents say something about you having some type of Indian in their blood, or you Cherokee, or you this and then you Blackfoot. I've heard it many a times growing up, but our parents never told us. And my father said something. This was also in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina went down. I heard my father say, because my grandmother was from Louisiana. My father was born in Arkansas, but my grandmother moved out of Louisiana after 1927 because it was also another massacre that took place when they blew up the levees back then, and they forced people, black people, at gunpoint and was whipping them like slaves to repair the levees. My grandmother lived through that, and it was so horrible that she said, fuck it. She moved up out of Louisiana behind that. So I heard my father say this. He said they on the TV calling them people refugees, trying to get them to move up out of there, flood them out. And half them people been living down there in that town before they even started calling it New Orleans. Now, I didn't think much about it then, but I'm like, what do you mean by that? And then later on, years later, I see people like Dane Calloway on the internet talking about how we indigenous people to this land. Now, I know I done went off topic from Tulsa, but it all ties in. My favorite saying is, everything is connected. But it goes back to this point of the older people not passing down the history. Now, my father's gone. He passed away in 2017. And the information he may have had, maybe a little bit, maybe tons. We'll never know. He's gone. He never told it. And for the most part, we never asked. And I'll never forget when Alex Haley said, how come you never said this? How come you never told this about the family or about our people? Because they'll look at you and say, you never asked. We should know more about our history as black people. We shouldn't be sitting up here waiting on mainstream media that hid it and locked it away from us for 100 goddamn years, and then depend on them to tell us the history. The greatest history that you can get is from the living old people in your family. And so many of them are going, so many of them are dying now. So many people that had access to events that they actually lived are dying off. And we'll never know, and we've lost a great part of our history that can be told from the lips of another black human being. I just still find it strange that a lot of things people have just been talking about in the last 10 years, I've been knowing since I've been out of 8th grade. And I think that's shameful. There were many tussles that took place in America. There were many massacres that took place in America. The information is out there. If you know where to look and know where to start to look, you'll find more of it in a book than you will on Google. But Google is a good place to start. But most of it you will find in a book, in a library. If you can afford it, the Library of Congress or the library, in Washington, D.C. And you'll find out a lot. In a way, plenty of lies I've told Plenty of lies have been told, but the truth is always documented. But that truth, they'll keep it locked up. And I guess that's why they call them libraries, because it's the place where they bury the lies along with the truth. So we should know. And learning is a lifelong experience. Until the day you laying on your deathbed, you will learn something. We should know more. We need to pass down more. We need to know our history. And before I get off of here about this, just last year, I was sitting in a classroom where there was a couple of Hispanic people in there, Mexican more than likely. And one of them was a female. And I was talking to a Mexican dude. And somehow the topic came up, and I said to him that a lot of us ain't from no damn Africa. A lot of us is from right here. And this Mexican girl that was sitting like a seat over from me, she turned her head and looked at me and was nodding her head like in a yes motion. And she was like, yeah, why don't you all know all this? She was surprised to know that I knew. And most of it I found out from YouTuber Dane Calloway. But when I said that, this Mexican girl turned around, looked at me and was like, yeah, I don't know why you guys keep saying African. A lot of you guys are from here. And that's what I said. A lot of us are from here. A lot of us didn't come from no Africa. And she was so much in agreement with it, it just blew her mind. But that's just a small little part and a whole nother story for another day. But we need to pass down what we know. And so many older people have died off. Some of the things we'll never know until we go to these libraries to read up on our history, to find the true facts that Google is not going to edit and delete. Learn and know and always want to learn, because learning is a never-ending process. And nobody's history on the face of this planet has been deleted, erased, and rewritten and rearranged more than the Negro on this whole entire planet. No one else's history has been through that than ours. So with that, it's a whole lot more I probably could say, but I think I'm kind of running out of gas on this one. So with that, keep learning, keep knowing, keep searching, and start talking to and getting as much information from your elders in your family, or from a neighbor, or from that old man on the street. Go to some of these nursing homes and sit down and talk. You got to think about it. You got this bullshit ass coronavirus, and it's targeting towards black and brown, which is bullshit in the first place. And it's also targeting our elderly. Our elderly is a treasure trove of information. Now you can't even go up in a nursing home and sit down and talk with old people to get information, which I think is part of a plot. Kill them off so that they don't be able to tell the story. I'm really starting to believe that. Let this bullshit ass coronavirus go around. And to those of you who lost someone to it, it's no disrespect to your loss of your loved ones. But if only in America they put pre-existing conditions in front of it, how the hell do you know if they died from corona or if it was just a damn diabetes or blood pressure? You ain't allowed to see and talk to the doctor, so how the hell you know other than what they wrote down on the death certificate? I'm still alive. I'm not dead. This is supposed to be so deadly. I ain't dead yet. Somebody ain't telling the fucking truth. But get your information. Treasure and value your old people, not just in your own bloodline, but anyone who can give you any knowledge about yourself and your people. With that, I'm going to end it with that. Have a good day.